All right, we got a great interview for you guys today. It's actually two people. They're the people behind the movie The Culture High. Brett Harvey is right now in Warsaw. How's that for fun? He is the writer and director of the movie. And we've got Adam Scorgie in the studio here. He's a producer and executive producer of the movie as well. Now, before they worked on the movie, The Union, the business behind Getting High, that only got into 33 international film festivals and was won the National Film Board Award for the Best Canadian Documentary. The Culture High features people like Snoop Dogg, Kevin Smith, Joe Rogan, Be Real from Cypress Hill, and not a big deal, but me and Anna Kasparian as well. Okay.
Absolutely.
Which, by the way, is actually not a big deal. Okay, so, guys, I want to talk to you about the movie, obviously. First question, Adam, are you high right now?
No, I am not high. Unfortunately, I'm sober. I just came in from Edmonton, Alberta, so nothing that exciting. Maybe just a little tired.
Has anyone in Canada ever gotten high?
Yes, lots. Canada, they say an estimate of about 50% of Canadians have tried smoking cannabis, and it's roughly 25% smoke on a regular basis, according to
Wow,
stats,
okay,
yeah.
I did not know that. The Canadians, very high, okay. Makes sense. All right, now, Brett, you're in Poland. It's 3 in the morning there. Let me ask you an interesting question. When's the last time you, I was going to say, when was the earliest you've ever gotten high? But I've decided I'm going to switch that. Do you engage in the product that your movie's about? Do you smoke pot, and when was the last time you smoked pot?
Yeah, pot for me, pot basically has never been a big deal for me. It's been one of those things that if it's around and some friends had it at a party or something, I would try it. That's basically still where I sit. I'm guessing maybe 5 months ago. 5-6 months ago.
Oh, wow.
When I smoked it last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is the editor on the film, who's also another producer, he smoked it once in his life and says he actually didn't get high from it. Adam basically never smokes pot either. And I would say probably 50% of the people who work on it don't smoke pot.
So that is interesting. Now, I've tried smoking pot 3-4 times. It never worked for me. I'm sure I'm doing it wrong. And then over Christmas, so what are we talking about, 8-9 months ago, I did an edible. That turns out did work for me. And then I was cultural sky high.
Yes.
Okay. But the reason I bring that up and then why we're starting a conversation that way is that this isn't about like a bunch of guys who want to get high and so they're trying to justify it. There's incredibly important social issues at play here. So, Adam, let me ask you, why were you guys so motivated to make 2 different movies about marijuana?
It's a great question. I mean, actually, we didn't want to do the second one. Neither Brett or I. We thought we'd covered it all in The Union, but you know, The Union had become a cult classic, similar to the way the Turks did through online, right? Mm-hmm. Millions of people have been downloaded on Pirate Bay, millions of times seen on Netflix, and we built this organic online community. Long before Facebook and Twitter became regular business models, we were building a Facebook page. And then with all, and as you guys know, because you guys cover it, I think, most honestly on the Turks, drug policy is changing drastically all over the world right now. So our fans literally kept messaging us and emailing us saying, you have to do another one, you have to do a follow-up to The Union. And we tried to push it away because, you know, obviously because of the subject matter, when you do films like this, people assume that that's all you're about, right? Even though it's like, no, we just want to make a great film. We're filmmakers. We'll go into any subject that's interesting to us, and this is one that grasped us with the first film. So we tried to, you know, ignore the demand, but then eventually they kept pushing us, so we went to market, pre-sold some of it with Phase 4 Films, North America, and Super Channel, all the people that bought the first one because they did very well. And then to really make this one something special and better than the first one and different, we went back to the audience and said, listen, we need this much money, otherwise we won't be able to do it. And we went to Kickstarter, and the audience spoke loud and clear. We raised 240 grand in 42 days, and they said, yes, we're putting our hard-earned money, we want you to make another one. So at that point, we were committed, and we went forward and made the second one.
All right, that makes a ton of sense. So, Brett, what is the focus of this movie for people who haven't seen it, as opposed to the first one?
Well, the first one was basically an introduction to marijuana overall. It's actually one of the biggest differences that I've noticed between making the two, which is when we did the first one and we brought up arguments on marijuana, it was shocking to people. People had no idea that that those kind of arguments were out there with marijuana. The second one, now that the internet's been around, shows like yourself, podcasts, information just flowing, people actually are educated on the topic this time, which actually makes it much more difficult to do a documentary that people are going to, want to see, because it's different from what they see in their daily lives. So with this one, the only way that I wanted to do it is it had to go beyond just the arguments of marijuana to look at the structures of society and how they actually facilitate the perpetuation of the war. So it's clear that, yes, various sectors of society, it doesn't make sense what they're doing, but how are they set up so that they keep perpetuating that? That's the difference in this one.
So then I gotta ask, of course they should watch the movie and the whole context and the whole picture of it, but what's the essence of why it continues to go on when it makes, to all rational people, when you lay out the facts, it makes no sense. Drug use goes down when you legalize in all the places that they have done, let alone all the other facts involved, let alone the mass incarceration and all the deaths in Mexico and throughout the world, etc. So what's driving it to continue?
Well, I would say that aside from the lobbying efforts, which are apparent in all aspects of it, whether it's pharmaceutical, law enforcement, every side of it, it's the one thing that to me, what it seemed like has kept it there is the lack of information to the public. And that's what's actually causing the shift now, and that's what we kind of get to in the film, which is the internet has kind of driven this forward. It's all of a sudden mass amounts of people have access to this information, and not only do they have access to the information, they're able to share it. And that seems to be what's tearing it down, whereas before, all you ever got fed was what was on the nightly news or what was in, the newspaper. Like an article just came out in the Daily Mail in England, and it was a headline that you could literally rip right out of 1930, back in the Reefer Madness days. Mm-hmm. And so now that there's that flow of information, and shows like yourself, like people have choices, and then they're able to go out and have discussions about those choices, that's what's actually going to take down what's kept it where it is for all these years.
Yeah, I actually think there's a decent parallel between the issue of the war on drugs and gay marriage. I think that once more information is out there, it's harder to deny. On the issue of religion, people read into it a little bit more, and they're like, wait, it is in the Old Testament where there's a lot of other rules about don't eat shrimp and don't mix your cloths and all those different things. And I thought Jesus got rid of a lot of that, right? And then it gets people thinking. And then the other part of it is that they know a lot of gay people now because more people have come out. And I mean, look at Canada. You said, Adam, 50% have smoked pot. So they know a lot of people who smoke pot and their heads have not exploded.
Exactly. Well,
right.
and shows like yourself and everything else that have been covering it in a much more honest platform, right? It's actually a great segment that you cover in the film where it just says people were searching for the truth, and then now when they can find it, they latch onto it, right? And then they're able to share it in a way. Like in the first film, we have a great clip of Ronald Reagan. I'm not sure when it was, whether he was running to be president or he was already, and he says in his press conference, there's this new information. I'm surprised the media hasn't made it more prominent than they have, that they believe that marijuana could be the most dangerous drug that is in use in our society today. Well, if you said that now, literally people would be on their computer being like, what study are you referring to? Because I'm on PubMed right now and I'm looking at all these scientific studies, and I don't see the one you're referring to, right? But back in the day when he was doing that, like when he said it, you're like, man, he's running for president. He knows shit we don't know.
Right.
Right? So you could scare people on that. But now you've got HD video, you've got sharing networks, you can get followings, you can get people. I mean, look, you guys are challenging, you guys are mainstream news essentially, but you built it from the ground up, from the people up with the truth. Where now, and it's great because you'll see, like something like Brett mentioned, the Daily Mail. Now there's been several other reputable sites that have ripped apart that article because they said, why didn't you put the links to the study? And actually the doctor they referred to has come out saying, that's not how I pose this at all, and I'm actually in favor of decriminalization. So you didn't have that before, where now all these other bloggers and stuff can actually get attention and show the fallacies in your reporting. That wasn't there before.
You know, I often wonder, I often wondered why politicians continue to blatantly lie about things that they have said in the past, Then I realized, and part of that was watching The War Room, another documentary about the Clinton election, right? If you remember, Stephanopoulos and Carville are kind of the stars of that documentary. And I realized getting tape back then was hard. Like you had to, oh, he said something in, 91. Oh, let's go try to find the tape on it, right? And so politicians are used to getting away with a lot of bullshit. And now it's super easy. Dude, you're on YouTube. I mean, that video is everywhere.
Everywhere.
So when you say X and then you say Y, I'm going to do a segment on X and Y, and you're going to look ridiculous. And so the bottom line is marijuana is not that dangerous. So when the so-called authority figures keep blatantly lying to us that it is dangerous, it's just too easy to refute them.
Well, and that's what Brett does a great job of explaining in the film, is that, people want to defend their egos and defend their badge of identity. So they will argue despite the facts won't penetrate. You can bombard them with facts, but it's so tough to come out and say, oops, I might have made a mistake, right? It's easier just to keep perpetuating the lie and keep going with the people that are financing you, and you can do those one-word answers. I believe it's a gateway drug, and I believe it's harder drugs, and boom, I'm done with this conversation. Or what about the children, right? That's one that I was going to say. What about the children, right?
Yeah, I love that. Anytime you're opposed to anything, you just say, what if the children did that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yes. You were saying, Brett?
What I was going to say was, the thing about marijuana is, even if you buy into all the dangers with it and you think it's the worst drug on earth and it's going to do all these things, it still doesn't make sense treating it the way we are. The philosophy with the prohibition right now is, we think that you're hurting yourself, so we're going to hurt you further by putting you in jail, and somehow that's going to make you better. So if the purpose is actually to help somebody, it's the last thing you would actually want to do. So even if they do believe that marijuana is the worst thing in the world for somebody, it's still the last way we should be doing it right now, if you actually want to help them.
So, but part of the reason why it continues is because of the prison industrial complex, right? So now they make a lot of money from it, and this is why money in politics is the #1 issue for us here at the Young Turks, because you guys are right. Whether it's pharmaceutical companies, it's the prison companies, it's all these different companies, and the cops themselves, they've gotten used to making money in a certain way. Then they grease the politicians, right, with a tiny percentage of the profits, and to maintain the system as it is, because they profit off the current system. Now, having said that, it's easy to refute them. It's easy to show that they're wrong. I think a lot of Americans understand the war on drugs is overhyped, it's wrong, it's counterproductive, etc. But people still make money through the war on drugs. So Adam, what's your sense of when those two things, when the forces of truth win, right? Is that going to happen? How quickly is it going to happen?
I think you see it happening, and we mentioned this in the film, is that the cracks in the monolith is kind of the way we say, have already happened with Colorado and Washington, right? And the horror stories haven't been there, and it's going to be tougher and tougher as money's being made and it's going back into the system. They've raised like $12 million for schools. New usership hasn't gone up. It's not this rampant thing that they were being sold on. And we actually have Ed Burns, who was a co-creator of HBO's The Wire and former Baltimore. He really covers the police part of it really, really well in the film. And it's probably one of the scarier parts that people can't believe, is that, like you say, the profit motives. I have children, right? So if you're worried about the children, police efforts, they're not financially incentivized to go after a murderer or rapist. They don't get proceeds of crime. They don't get seizures of assets, right? Ed Burns talks about this, but they get that for drug offenses and everything else. And like Ed Burns says in the film, one arrest is equal to one arrest. When they do their reports and they say, okay, I brought in this many arrests and this, he's like, you don't get extra points for like a hardcore murder or anything. So what are you going to go to get that's easier, right? You're going to go get the simple trafficker, the minor possession guy. That's easy. He has it on him, possession, you got him. Simple paperwork, you got him, your conviction's done. That is one for you, right? To go get a hard drug dealer, someone else, you got to get wiretaps, you got to get investigation, hard evidence, and he's going to have money to defend himself in the justice system. So it's much harder to get that conviction to stick. So when you hear cops saying this, and they're like, yeah, they're like, we are financially incentivized to go after these crimes. And he's like, there's a harmony between the high-level cops. They want to keep prosecuting people that are using and selling small amounts of drugs, and the drug dealers want to keep selling their drugs. So that part for us, when we were interviewing these ex-cops and former DEA and former Supreme Court judges, and you start hearing that from them, that is a scary thought.
Yeah, I just read a story about how a couple of cops who got caught on corruption said, look, man, we got a taste of the money because every time we did the drug bust, we'd get to seize all the money, and we'd seize the cars, and we'd seize everything. And then we started thinking, hey, why are we turning all of this over to the department? And the department sends us to get it. It's the department's in on the corruption in a sense, right? Yeah. Why don't we just keep a little bit of it for ourselves? And eventually we just became one of the gangs,
yep.
Right? And unfortunately, that's what's happened in the country. So given all of that, do we win on this thing?
I don't think there's any easy win. I don't think it's just going to come like, oh, there's a win. But I think, you know, films like this, shows like you guys are doing, where constantly this information is coming out, and I mean, now people can protect themselves with video. They can do things that can kind of bring, like, you know, like now you see a lot of places where people want to put a dash cam in their car, right? Just so that they're always got something recording. You've got your phone there that can protect you. And it sucks that you should have to get to, but I think as more and more information keeps coming out there and people can get easily access that information, I think you're going to continue to start seeing things change. And you're having a lot of great people come forward and speak now that weren't willing to do so. When we did the union in 2004, 2005, it was tough to get people to come out and talk about these things. And at the time when we released the union, people were like, man, some of your stuff with the private prison stuff, that seems like propaganda. And now that's like common knowledge, right? So we were ahead of our time. But you see, in this film, that was really interesting. Like, you know, Sir Richard Branson sat down with us this time. We had you guys sit down with us, you know, some big celebrities. Like, people were much more willing to sit down and say, look, I've seen what's coming out, and there's a lot of wrong. And if I can just, you know, help with this doc and get the information out there, you know, because we think we're kind of stealing a Tupac quote here, but a lot of people, when we were screening, were saying, man, your film might change the world. And we're like, step back, we're just filmmakers trying to make a great film, but we do believe that our film can spark the mind of somebody that might go out and change things. So that's what information, your show, our films, podcasts, this new thing has really shifted consciousness in a way that I think it is happening, and it's happening faster than we've seen in the last 40 years, but I still don't think it's just around the corner. I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Brett, how many people are in prison right now for drugs?
What is it? It's like, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. We literally have about 1,000 statistics, but I believe it's half of them. Is that not correct?
Is it around 1 million?
From my understanding.
Yeah, well, in the average in the United States, and you guys covered this very well, that even, you know, still last year was 750,000 were arrested for simple possession. And
that's just simple possession.
Simple possession, right?
That's insane, man.
And there's just actually a report today that Transform released, how the juvenile justice system just released a report saying that they think that it should be fully decriminalized and move towards legalization, and how even in places where they've decriminalized, they've still seen a very unproportionate arrest rate for minorities and impoverished neighborhoods, which makes sense when you understand how the justice system works, right? And we say this in the film. The drug laws demonstrate that there's clearly one law for the rich and powerful and one law for everybody else, right? And you can get away with, like, look, we joke with celebrities, like, oh, they got caught doing crack again, right? And it's like a big joke, or a politician gets caught and it's like a slap on the hand. But if you're, you know, from a poor neighborhood and don't have the kind of assets to go through the justice system, you're screwed. Like, good luck.
It'll ruin your life.
Yeah, you will not be able to travel. And that's kind of what Brett was saying. It was like, you know, this whole thing of like, okay, yes, there are dangers associated with cannabis, like there is with just about anything, including the North American diet. But if you really want to protect children or youth, taking away their right to education, criminalizing them, preventing them from traveling or getting another job, and possibly putting them in a prison, in a cage, that is far more damaging than not only cannabis, but just about any drug that you can find. That is far more harmful. And how we were ever convinced that this was how we were going to get out of an addiction problem and help our society is starting. People are like, yeah, I never thought about it that way. That's crazy. How were we ever convinced that that was going to help?
Yeah, look, Barack Obama smoked pot at Columbia University, and he wound up becoming president of the United States. I mean, I went to some decent schools. I never saw anyone ever get busted for drugs at those schools, right? Smoking those drugs, possessing those drugs, no way. But there's 750,000 people in prison for possession, right? So obviously there's two different justice systems here, and a lot of the people that are in the media are among the elites, so they don't have contact with and they don't see those 750,000 people, so they don't report on it. It's not that they're bad people, it's just they can't think outside of their own bubble. And they're like, what do you mean? We all smoke pot or we all do some sort of drugs and none of us ever go to jail, so they assume no one goes to jail. But that's not true. That's not overwhelmingly not true. In fact, Brett, that's where I was going to lead with this a little bit, and that's why I asked you about the numbers. You know, there's a group of people that are now saying that this is partly designed to put people back in chains, right? Now, you know, we've covered on the show that white people actually smoke pot just a little bit more than black people on average, according to studies. But black people get arrested for it 4 to 5 times as much. So is that a component here, or is it just, well, there's a lot of discrimination in the system and it just got, in this case, it also applied to drugs?
It's funny. In one of the reviews that we had, there was a person, the reviewer was apparently calling us out because they were saying that there's the black people in jail are there for more than just drugs, so that statistic doesn't make sense, and we shouldn't have it in the film. It's undeniable. It's a fact. You can't argue with the numbers. I don't understand how it can be seen any other way. When you do it at roughly the same rate and you're arresting at 4 to 1, what else could it be? How do you make an argument in any other way?
Yeah, those people ironically prove the problem, because they say, well, they were probably guilty of something. Well, that's kind of a racist thing to say. So, thank you for making our case for us.
Exactly.
Right. So, and then finally, I want to go back to this idea of how maybe we could get to a tipping point. So I think, Adam, when you brought up Colorado and Washington, I've been saying on the show, I think that's monumentally important, because kind of why the Republicans never wanted Obamacare to begin in the first place. That's why they tried so hard to kill it before it began, because they said, oh, if it happens, it's going to tear the country apart and the communists are going to take over, and you know, and none of you are ever going to go to another doctor in your lives, and all these scare tactics, because they knew that once it started, not only was that not going to happen, but that you might actually like your new insurance because it kind of covers more than it did before. You didn't have insurance, all of a sudden you have insurance and you kind of like that, and they didn't want that to take root. So in this analogy, in Colorado and Washington, it has taken root. Heads are not exploding. Everybody's kids didn't die. Okay? They're not all addicted to crack, right? So I think that might be not only just the beginning of the end, but that end might come a lot quicker if nearby states go, wait a minute now, this is crazy. Colorado's totally fine.
I think you're bang on, Cenk, and as you guys cover very well on the Turks, is that money ultimately is what gets politicians to decide things, you know, and that's kind of what we say in the film, that, you know, the great laws come from the bottom up, not from the top down. When the swell comes big enough, then a politician's going to come in and be a hero and be like, you know what, I'm going to legalize gay marriage, right? I'm going to come in this, and he looks like the hero. It's only because by then the people have swarmed to the point where he's going to look stupid on the wrong side of history if he stays on it. And Colorado and Washington have proved that, you know, all the horror stories aren't true, and things are like they're putting all this money back into the system. There's tax dollars to be had there. So that's what's going to win them over. And those cracks are being watched around the world right now, because the United States has pushed on a lot of other countries their drug laws in the UN, which a lot of countries like, we didn't really have a marijuana problem, but we don't want to take away our right to foreign aid, so we'll follow you, and you know, because you guys are the big brothers, so we have to do that. And Colorado and Washington are there, and there's, I mean, you have Alaska and like 4 other states coming up here in 2016, right? And you're going to just see it continue. And that's going to happen. And every state can do it differently, right? Kind of like they do with alcohol. Maybe some just do a decriminalized model, and others do a full, you know, commercial legalization model. Every state, you know, states differ drastically from Texas to New York to California, so they're going to have to figure it out themselves. But the one thing that seems to be pretty hard to argue, and you're finding almost no one willing to argue this now, is how, which goes back to what we were saying, criminalizing our youth and our people, preventing them from getting an education, furthering them down the justice path, where then we as taxpayers pay for them. It's becoming a hard argument, right? And politicians are you're starting to see a few of them come out that weren't like John McCain suggesting, and so they're kind of testing the waters, right? Like, what do you think about this? And then if it's too much, they're like, I was just saying, maybe we should look at it, right? But because they want to see if that's going to get them elected, because as we know, as you guys cover so well, and you covered in the film, politicians about money. They win. Who wins majority of the time? The one with the most money. So they're going to test the waters to see what gets them to win and where they're going to get their backing, right? So when the swell is big enough and you're starting to see a Colorado and Washington, you're going to see other states come. A lot of people are going to back politicians to run on that, and when it's big enough for them to run, then they'll come in and be the hero.
So Brett, finally, are we going to see the domino effect here, and how quickly? Both in the state level, you know, the dominoes that Adam was just talking about, and also internationally, that when the U.S. says, nah, we're just kidding, we're not doing the war on drugs anymore, how much does that affect the rest of the world?
Yeah, as far as on the state level, I kind of look at it like the horror movies. Like the scariest horror movies to me are always the ones that leave it up to your own mind to be, figuring out what the actual monster is. But when you have those movies where you actually see the monster and you see it's just a fake mask and stuff, that's kind of what we have with Colorado right now, which is that people are seeing that it's not so scary. It's familiar now. And, you touched on that earlier. Absolutely, that's going to affect the international level, because the United States has been the ones pushing it. They were the ones that, were forceful in implementing it in the UN, and that's why the UN now is kind of slapping the U.S. on the wrist, but doesn't really mean much. And I think once the U.S. goes that way, the rest of the world's going to follow. Absolutely.
All right. Well, it's a great movie. Everybody check it out. The Culture High, and it's out in the movies now. It's in L.A.
It's in L.A. at Lamel's Royal Theater. It's there for another couple of days, and then October 17th, it's going to be available worldwide. We're doing the traditional release in North America through Phase 4 Films, or E1 now, and then internationally we're taking a risk and we're going online and going through Vimeo's Vimeo On Demand platform, just making it so that everywhere in the world can have access to an entertaining film that has purpose and gives you some insight in how the drug war is being pushed. So.
All right, Adam Scorgie and Brett Harvey, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man.
Makers of the Culture High.
Thank you,
check it out. Thank you, Brett.